These are the strangest cases of ancient medicine. Always looking at this photo, I thought it was a joke, like it's a normal foot just bent a little bit. So I want to tell you that it's far from a joke. It's called lotus feet. They used to bandage their feet when they were kids and put them in a slipper. Well, if the foot did not fit the grandmother or grandfather, simply broke the granddaughter all the toes except the big one, and then bent the leg. Supposedly so beautiful over time, naturally the leg began to grow, but the foot did not increase. You can see something similar if you put a watermelon in some kind of mold. Except the watermelon doesn't have the brains to realize that this eventually leads to necrosis. That is, to the rotting of the foot, to the point where the girl couldn't walk because her toes just fell off. Such girls were carried by servants, and it was considered a sign of a wealthy family. It's been a long time since then, hasn't it? And now we think it's at least strange. But that's before you know it's a trend to break your legs. I'm not kidding. This man has had a leg augmentation surgery, and to do this, they broke his legs, put spokes in them, and augment them every day so that the bone gradually builds up. It would seem to make sense that you could screw in a light bulb without a chair, but these surgeries eventually lead to thrombosis. And in case you don't know, a tromp is a little guy that just bounces off the walls of your blood vessels, flies through your bloodstream to your heart, and stops it. So the question remains, have we wised up? Today we will talk about terrible ancient rituals and how in ancient times treated people. For example, why did the ancient Chinese remove their eggs? And of course, we'll discuss today's shocking technology. This is a forceps for removing, you know what? In medieval times, so treated with guilty soldiers. This is the hole the eggplant was shoved into, and these ribbed tips were used to hold the bells in place. The degree of tension depended on how many soldiers voted for his execution. Well, then the tongs were squeezed. At the same time, in China, men castrated themselves with this device because only eunuchs could become servants of rulers, because the main role of a servant was to look after wives, and as it is known, wives' eunuchs are not interested. So if a man wanted to get out of the mud in the prince, then be kind to leave his balls at home. And the worst thing is that sometimes even parents themselves cut it off from their children. Even at a young age, it's much more painful for an adult. Well, now get ready a little math. The ruler had only 400 places for one role of a servant. So for each place of a servant, there was a competition for 250 people. And now just multiply 400 by 250 and get 100,000 eunuchs, of which only 400 will become eunuchs, and the rest 999,600 people. Just so it was done to themselves. If you think that in those years it was all over, you're wrong. Only the forceps changed. But then people found out that if you castrate a boy before he's 14 years old, his vocal cords will remain unchanged during his maturity. That is, as flexible as when he was a boy and he could hit the high notes. Girls in those years were forbidden to sing in church choirs, and so a boy could make a girl out of a boy literally in a second. Each of us has seen in history books how ancient people had fun drawing some scribbles on the walls of caves. Compared to them, we are now at the top of the development, but you realize that in a few years, hundreds of thousands of years, and we too will be considered ancient people. Our technology will be laughed at, but you realize that in a few thousand years, their technology will also be laughed at. Then is there any development at all if at every point in time we think we are on top of it? I would rather call it an opportunity to compare, because we have memory and we can remember what was before and compare it with what is now. If modern medicine has long ago learned to cheat nature, and in fact, after a serious accident, it is possible to reassemble a person as if from Lego parts, will we have to pay for it at some point? Look at this man. He will be the first whose head will be transplanted to another body. Because of the disease, his personal body is completely paralyzed. The meaning of the operation is that if a person has a damaged body but his brain remains intact, his head can be transferred to a person who has a damaged brain, but everything else is intact. It is reasonable in principle, because both would die, and so at least one person remains alive. Everything seems to be okay, but imagine yourself as a person who came to the mirror after a serious accident. At that moment, you find that the reflection is a completely different person. You realize that everything you knew about yourself no longer exists. Your eyes are different, your hair is different, and all that remains is a memory of the person you once were. Most likely not even the body will remain because it will be burned. But what if we change the situation a little bit? What if a person is transplanted not the whole brain, but half of it? There are cases when people lose the whole brain, but only a part of it. Who would wake up in that case? You, or him, or both? Will you, for example, hear the thoughts of the person whose body it was originally? Because let's be honest, it's quite likely that in the next 20 years this will be possible. The ancient Chinese believed that if you take the feces of a healthy person, pour water over them, and stir, and then drink this slurry as a soup of a sick person, he will recover. So they've been practicing this for years. I can already see your sour faces. But wait, it's early. The thing is, the Chinese were not wrong this time. Attention, this photo is from OpenBee Lab, which has been buying feces from people for 2 years to sell to the needy. It's actually a feces bank. Everything works like this. A person has a lot of bacteria in the body. You know, there are good bacteria and bad bacteria. And when your personal good bacteria cannot cope with the destruction of bad bacteria, then you have some disease, and accordingly, you need a donor of good bacteria. And as you've probably guessed by now, bacteria are most abundant in feces. It's a lab that collects fecal matter from all over the world to put in the right people, literally shoved in your stomach. So, we still haven't answered the question, is there evolution? I said earlier that I would call it more of an opportunity to compare, just because in terms of the universe, we're not really changing anything. I still think that everything is more correctly measured by the level of happiness, and I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about. For example, a person who used to draw on rocks, and a person who now draws on paper with a pencil. So if these two people at different times were equally happy in this occupation, then in essence nothing has changed. We have only changed the summoned, and as we know from the change of places of summons, the sum does not change. If you love my content, then like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new releases.